Good morning, butterflies. I did it again. Good morning, flutterbies. It's Butterfly. How are you? This morning I wanted to touch base with you about some of the work that I'm doing with my own inner child. Um, we know that inner child work can be very, very helpful, very beneficial, and possible. My opinion is I think everybody should do it at some point in their life when they're ready. When they're ready. So I've been ready to go a little deeper into things. I've certainly done some inner child work before my cat's at the door. Come on. Oh, I know. You want to come and see who I'm talking to? I'm talking to myself. Yes, I am. Oh, of course, now I should show my cat. Hang on. Oh, this is Simba. This is Simba. Yeah, my beautiful Simba. With his beautiful tail and his markings. He came with the name Simba because of his, he had this mane color, this mane. Anyways, he came with his brother, Gosmo, but Gosmo died earlier this year. Yeah. So this is my Simba. There we go. Okay. Now I'm full of fur. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of go into some of just to touch base, maybe to share with you, if you wanted to do some inner child work, what would that entail? What would that even look like? I highly recommend buying some kind of a workbook. This is the one I'm working through this time around, and I really quite like Catherine Taylor. She's this is a good one. At the time of the writing of this book, it says that she had 15 years as a therapist. And I'm not sure when this book was published, but so a lot of, I find her book is kind of built like a lot of inner child books, and it goes systematically from your younger years and on into your early adulthood. And sometimes books will go beyond that. They tend to follow, and she kind of follows, what's developmental psychology. There's a psychologist who broke up the developmental stages of children, Erik Erikson, and so you'd be really able to find that online pretty easily. So Erik Erikson was a psychologist who ended up sort of devising a systematic approach to developmental psychology and to understanding the development of the child. So he divided up basically stages. There are 8 stages. Now you might look at other theorists, other psychologists who have been known to divide up developmental stages, but basically you don't really have to be an expert in those developmental stages to know to go through a workbook to work with your inner child. But let's just kind of talk about Erik Erikson just kind of loosely, because I think that Catherine Taylor really kind of goes through a lot of the sort of stages. Now, she doesn't break it down systematically like Erik Erikson, but she does follow through from infancy and onward up until early adulthood. So just to kind of get the gist of it, Erikson started out by dividing, from age 0 to 18 months. That's kind of like your infancy, and it's kind of like you're working through the lower echelons of Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow's hierarchy, the triangle, where you're looking at basic needs first before you move all the way up to social skills and eventually self-actualization. So it's kind of like that. And my cat wants to go. Oh, I know. You're welcome. So it's kind of like that. So you're working through trust issues and security and how to gain control over your basic life skills. How can you manage your environment? Like crying. Okay, when I cry, that mummy person comes and she gives me food. And so I know that when my belly's hurting and I think I'm upset and I'm feeling kind of icky, I call and the mummy person gives me comfort, and or the daddy person or the other person, the nanny or whatever. I am feeling, I am receiving all the security and the attention that I need. Those are my basic needs. And trust. So you have to be able to trust that you're going to make an alliance with your basic caregiver, your primary caregiver, and that when you express a need for something, that caregiver will come and figure out what it is that you need and give you that diaper change or give you those, that entertainment or that psychological stimulation that you need. So when you've successfully kind of gone through that stage, then you go on into the next stage and so on and so forth. So I won't bore you with kind of like the details of each psychological stage with Erickson. Like there's early childhood, like there's school age, there's and as you're going through school age, you're getting autonomy over your work, you're mastering kind of your ability to create things, and then later on in teen years, you're working through your social skills. And so each stage has its what you kind of need, the criteria that are needed before you move successfully onto the next one. Time doesn't stop to say, did you learn trust? Okay, now you can move on to the next stage. Time just goes and you get older and you get older. So sometimes if you don't get what you need out of your environment and you don't develop the skills and the autonomy that you need at that stage, your age continues to progress. And it's a good thing too, otherwise we'd be stuck, right? So as you progress and you develop a little bit more autonomy, you develop some adaptation to your environment all along the way. Some of those ways of adapting are maladaptive. They're probably not, you do with what you can when you're a child. When you're a child, you don't have the same level of skills as you might have when you're an adult. Granted, a lot of adults don't have the skills because they haven't taken the time to really sort of be introspective and analyze and learn from, earlier experiences. So, yeah, that's basically the template for what I'm going through in this book. However, it becomes a lot less academic and a lot more spiritual at a certain point because there are experiences. Now, I don't think in my early childhood there's only limited experiences that I have. I mean, I have some experiences about places and things that have happened, but it's more like I pictured myself standing in a playpen looking into the dining room, and the edge of the playpen when I was standing was about this height. So I would say that I was probably over the age of 1 because I could stand, and under the age of 2, well under the age of 2 because I wasn't climbing out of it. So around that age, and that's just, I was looking into the dining room at people talking and so on. So the playpen was in the kitchen. So that's a memory that I have. But there's no kind of like before, middle, and after or any conversations or anything like that. I just remember, standing in the playpen at that point. I also seem to remember, it must have been a very young age, because I remember being rinsed in the sink during diaper change. So, to fit in the sink, you're pretty small. So that's one of my earlier memories. Another memory that I have is laying on my mom's chest. And she used to wear a cologne called L'air du Temps at the time. And it was like heaven. And her chest, for me, was just laying, I remember she was sitting in a chair, reclining chair, the rocking chair, big upholstered kind of type that you could, push the lever on the side and her feet go up. It was that chair. And her this area of her chest was like this big for me, and my head was just laying, and I was kind of looking up at her and just, kind of my eyes were aiming up towards her clavicle, and her chest was huge. So that is also a very early age, just given that, how big her chest was in relation to, my head and the memory itself. So, and it was comforting. It was like this field of mummy skin, it just felt comforting to me. And the smell. So yeah, those are early childhood memories for me. Now the thing is that those are very comforting memories, and I don't really think that I have many, horrible memories. Right now, I'm working through the infancy stage, um, and I don't really have these traumatic sort of things to remember at that time. But you don't really need to have those traumatic experiences to kind of go through a spiritual experience and to go through the healing and so on, because um, the thing is that some of those experiences where I learned to not have trust, the experiences where we all learn to not have trust, don't necessarily happen at that Ericksonian stage or at that developmental stage of 0 to 18 months. I mean, that's, I think, one of the pivotal things that I learned along the way in doing inner child work is that it's not that you only learn trust or mistrust at that age. It's that's the earliest stage. That's the starting point where you can start to learn something as basic as being able to trust and have mistrust and have security and start to feel that your needs are being tended to. Because if, for instance, you're in a situation where trauma happened at a later age, whether it's 6 or 12 or 14, 16, 24, then that is also developmentally, it can stunt your wellness. It can really have an effect. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that just because a theorist came along with this is a developmental stage, that something happened, and if you can't remember that trauma that happened from 0 to 18 months, then you'll never be able to explain why you can't trust and why you have trust issues. It's just that kind of connection. For me, I had to correct that kind of question for myself at a certain age, at a certain point in time years ago. So at this point, what I'm doing is I was looking for a doll. Actually, I was really kind of set on having a doll or a number of dolls as I'm doing inner child work again this time around with this book. And I wanted that doll to be part of my altar work. I may end up creating another one at some point. This is my monkey, taking care of my inner monkey. My kids are monkeys to me; they're little cuties. So as I sip on my chocolate tea, I'm going to show you my altar as it stands right now. I've gone back to the 3-table kind of altar. And the 2 side ones are basically not what I need to show you right now. Okay, I'm going to just, with my limited technology here. Okay, so just briefly over here, that's one side. So don't pay attention to that so much. And then I have my other side over here where I keep other things that I do. My incense and that sort of thing. But it's the middle one that I'm paying attention to right now. And this is probably the least cluttered setup that I've ever had. But while I'm doing my inner child work, this is definitely what I want. And you may look at this and say, dolls and Catholic saints, WTF, that doesn't make sense. But it does for me because of the meaning behind the things that are on my workspace. So I'll explain them to you. This is the doll that I'm working with as a representative of myself. Now, this is a special doll, and it's fraught with meaning because, well, she has little china feet. Let's start about here. And she has china hands, china glass hands, or made out of china, and her neck and bodice right here and head are made out of very breakable china. This was given to me by my mom when I was but a little girl, definitely under the age of 9. Probably I would have been about 6 or 7. Oh, and we have some incense here, or sage, or whatever that is. She had a different dress at that time. She had a brown print floral dress at that time, and a bonnet, a little hat, a straw hat, And my mom gave it to me, and she said, "This is for you for when you get older." And she would put it in her closet. She had a linen closet. She had 2 closets in her bedroom, and she put it within the sheets that she kept in her linen closet. And she said, "That's for you." And so that moment for me was a very precious moment because my mom was giving me something, and she was keeping this special thing for me for when I got older. Now, um, as with many things, uh, she's obviously forgot that that was supposed to be my doll, and in my adult years, she had given it to a sister of mine. She's the one sister who I get along with probably the best for the longest time. Um, but she gave it to my sister, and I told my sister, "You have my doll." And of course, as an adult, I was sort of like, typical that it would be given to somebody else, and that there would be no memory of this very special moment that we had when I was a kid. Anyway, my sister ended up doing some research on the type of doll, and she went to a seamstress and got a different dress made because the other one was kind of old and tattered, and the seamstress said that this style of dress would have been more in keeping with the look of the shoes and that sort of thing. So I wasn't keen on the blue because it's kind of was my favorite color as a child, but since then it has been, it was my favorite color for so long that I kind of got tired of it. And going to Catholic school for 5 years, actually, in high school, we had a blue uniform, and I just got an aversion to the color blue. As luck would have it, I quite like that this dress is blue because it was my favorite color in childhood. So another reason why this doll is appropriate. And also it's the color of my heart chakra, or sorry, of my throat chakra. And my throat chakra is my inner child needs to find her voice to speak. She needs to find her voice. So it just makes sense. All of these things make sense. And so this doll is fraught with meaning, and my sister gave her back to me. And so she's front and center stage here while I'm doing my China. This is I'm reading this. Made in China. Yeah, well, so's the coronavirus. Okay, so there we go. That's that. Now these 2 Mother Cabrinis, my parents had dressers that were like kind of twin dressers, the stand-up kind of stacking dressers, gorgeous, antique type, and they were matching. And my mom had a Mother Cabrini. This is my mom's Mother Cabrini, which she just gave me this year, or this past November for my birthday. She gave me this Mother Cabrini because she knows I'm pretty keen on it. And I would always look at this statue on her dresser, and this was my dad's Mother Cabrini that he put on his dresser. Now, my mom says that she was the one who kind of had that first, and my dad got one afterwards. So these were images that are fused in my brain of their dressers, with each of them having a Mother Cabrini on them. Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini is what's written on the bottom of both of them. And I won't bother you with too many details about her life, just that when you pray to Mother Cabrini, the belief is that you will always have enough money saved up somewhere. You'll be able to go somewhere when you need money. You'll never be rich, but you'll always have enough to get by. So she's always been like a saint that I carried through. I started very, very young being eclectically spiritual. But she was always part of my pantheon, my belief system. And I may want to kind of disown her a little bit because I actually do want to be wealthy. I do want to be well off, and I do want to have creature comforts that I don't have. But I've always held that, okay, you'll never be rich, but you'll have some. Anyways. So that's why I have my child here, and my father's statue here, and my mother's on the left side, which is the female side for my altar. And also, the setup is this book, which I got when I was about 20, 21 years old. Actually, 1993, March 24th, 1993. So, yeah, no, I was 22 at the time. And this was my first kind of connection to the adult child of the alcoholic. Now, my father used to be, well, my father is died in 2001, but he was an alcoholic until their final separation. My parents separated when I was 9, and so this was my first introduction to the concept of being an adult and a child at the same time. What is an adult and a child at the same time? And that people who grow up with addiction in the family have things in common. So you can read something on every day. It's kind of one of these daily affirmations things. But as I read more about adult children of alcoholics, I learned that, oh my goodness, there's really something in common with that experience, and that it isn't my fault. And the shame is something that's kind of like inherent in the experience, and that I don't have to own it. I can kind of cut that away, and that is a big struggle. So therein lies the explanation for what I have here as I'm doing this inner child work. And I'm sharing this with you not so much so that I can, really give a ton of details about my own life, but just to kind of normalize it, that we all have our experiences. We all have some kind of, thing that we go through as children. And what I think is normal, and it was my experience. There's nothing that I can do about it to say that, this is a horrible experience, or growing up in my family was my experience. And that's what I have to work with. Spiritually, I believe that before being born, I chose this family to learn the things that I wanted to learn, to do the things that I want to do, to affect the change that I want to make in the world. And I do think that going through all of those experiences when I was young shaped who I am, and it took a shit ton of years to kind of identify those things and to kind of cut away the responsibility that I felt and the shame and the guilt that I felt for being, unworthy and horrible and defective. And to say, no, those are the feelings that you get, but really, I'm not horrible. I am a likable person. I am a wonderful person. I truly do, affect people in a really positive way, and people will be attracted to me. I can have friendships. These are all new concepts as I grew older as an adult, because I didn't have those when I was a kid, and there are reasons for that. So what I'm doing is I'm sharing with you that if you do have those feelings, if you have depression, if that's where your depression stems from, explore those things and really become your own adult and look at those messages that you got when you were a child, and discover how you would have treated that child, if you were to meet her now, if you were to meet him now. So that's why I'm really having this dialogue with this doll, because for me, the doll has that kind of significance. For you, you may want to create your own doll, make a paper doll, make a cloth, fabric doll. You may want to have your favorite teddy bear. I had considered, there's a stuffed animal that I have named Peppermint. It's a green bunny that looks shabby, but it's actually, I've managed to, it's followed me from childhood, so I still have it around somewhere. It has one eye. And I was going to do my inner child work with that, and if I can find Peppermint somewhere, I might just do that because it's snuggly and cuddly. You may have an object or a teddy bear or something, but you find that thing that, so that you can objectify, that you can kind of look at that. It's kind of like, for me, if I can make a comparison to paganism or with deity, or spirituality as we understand it, it's kind of like looking at the personified deity. You look at the entity as a whole, the energy, the memory of it, and you personify it. You put an object to it so that you can dialogue with it. So it's kind of like that. And when I open dialogue with myself as a child, then I can look at the little child and say, you know what? It really brings it home to me. Look at how vulnerable you are. Look at how vulnerable you look with your childlike features. And I have, just to remind myself, some sheets that I've printed with developmental stages. You might get them at your, local health unit or at your doctor's office or off the internet. Remind yourself of those developmental stages and how vulnerable and limited you were with skills and resources at those ages when you recall those memories, and how dependent you were on the adults that were around you, and how unfair it is for you to continue to punish yourself because you had limited resources and you had to adapt to it, maybe a very difficult situation when you were younger. As an adult, we have the option to get up and leave. We have the option to move out of a home that is, not healthy or toxic. We can drive away. We can find a different job if the job place is difficult. We can implement changes that as an adult that we could not do when we were young. In fact, sometimes you might even be brought to the attention of Children's Aid when you're young and put back into the toxic family situation for various reasons. So, or even being torn away from that toxic situation may cause you to feel ripped away from your family of origin, and you're being put into a foster family, and that may be better or worse than your family of origin. So these are all things that you need to understand about your childhood and the vulnerability you had as a child and the limitations that you had mentally and emotionally. You didn't have the maturity to deal with things the way you do now. So your perceptions are very different. You really have to kind of look at it from a psychological perspective and appreciate those developmental stages. But you also have to look at it from a spiritual perspective and kind of really be soft and gentle with that inner child and say, I don't blame you. If I saw a 4-year-old right now or an 8-year-old right now or a 16-year-old right now, would I be as blaming to that child as I am blaming myself for past memories? So you have to take that into consideration. So I guess this video is a little, on the long side so far. I do have other things that I'd love to share, but I think I'll put this video out now and maybe share different things on different videos, so that way, instead of making a very long, cumbersome one, now that I have a little bit more time to make videos, I can sparse them out a little bit more and get back on track. Curious thing though, I want to ask you, the viewer. I noticed last Sunday I put out 2 videos. They weren't supposed to come out on the same day, but they did. Something happened with the date setting or whatever. But I do want to ask you a question. I put out 2 videos. One was kind of like an update of what I'm trying to do with myself physically in terms of nutrition, because we do have to take care of ourselves nutritionally. And the other one was the introduction to the inner child work that I'm going to be doing. And a funny thing, within like 2 days of people watching that video, I lost like 7 subs. And I'm just curious if you happen to kind of come by and see what you think might have happened there. I'm curious, because normally what I do is I talk a lot about tarot and witchcraft, because I like that, and spirituality, but certainly there's a lot of book reviews that I do, and I approach things from a kind of more of a mental health and psychological perspective. So it wouldn't be unusual to talk about inner child, but I just thought it was a big sort of coincidence that I put out those 2 videos and then lost 7 subs. I gained 1 back, I guess, since then, but I just found it curious. So I'm just looking for some positive feedback, some reframing, some helping me to understand what might have been the challenge there and why that might have happened. Because I'm curious. Okay. Take care. I hope this was at least a little bit interesting and enlightening, and maybe even encourages you to do some inner child work as well. Take care. Have a great day.